They said Olivia Hart was insane to defend herself in court. Her billionaire husband laughed, loudly, publicly, certain she would break. But when she finally opened her mouth, every heartbeat in that courtroom stopped. This is the story of the woman they underestimated, and how her voice brought an empire to its knees. Welcome back. Drop a comment and let me know. Where are you watching from and what time is it over there right now? They said Olivia Hart was delusional to walk into court without a lawyer. The whispers started the moment she pushed through the heavy oak doors of Superior Court Department 9. Her heels clicked against the marble floor, steady, deliberate. But her hands told a different story. They trembled slightly as they gripped a single manila folder, knuckles white against the tan paper. "You'll embarrass yourself," one woman muttered from the gallery, not even bothering to lower her voice. "She'll fold in 5 minutes," another agreed, shaking her head with practiced pity. Olivia heard every word. She felt every stare. But she kept walking. Across the courtroom, Damien Hart reclined in his seat like a king surveying peasants. His navy Tom Ford suit was crisp, perfectly tailored, the kind of clothing that announced wealth before a single word was spoken. His grin was wide, careless, confident, the grin of a man who had never lost anything that mattered. Beside him sat Adrian Wolfe, the shark in a three-piece suit. Adrian leaned close, whispering something that made Damien's grin widen further. Both men glanced at Olivia, then back at each other, sharing a joke she wasn't meant to hear. Olivia stood alone at the plaintiff's table, her crimson dress, soft, floral, bought 5 years ago for a charity gala Damien had forced her to attend, seemed too delicate for the cold marble and mahogany that surrounded her. She looked fragile, breakable, a housewife stumbling into a war she wasn't built for. "All rise." Judge Raymond Ellison entered with the authority of a man who had seen every trick, every lie, every desperate gambit the legal system could produce. He was old school, his reputation built on zero tolerance for incompetence and even less for theatrics. He settled into his seat, adjusted his glasses, and reviewed the docket with a weary sigh. Case number 47-2024, Hart v. Hart. Final hearing on asset division and dissolution of marriage. His eyes lifted. Appearances. Adrian Wolfe stood smoothly, buttoning his jacket with practiced precision. Adrian Wolfe, representing the respondent. Damien Hart, Your Honor. Judge Ellison's gaze shifted to the other table. And for the petitioner? Olivia stood. Her chair scraped loudly against the floor, a harsh, nervous sound that made several people in the gallery wince. "Olivia Hart, Your Honor," she said quietly, her voice barely carrying across the room. "Representing myself." The silence that followed was suffocating. Then Damien laughed. It wasn't a quiet chuckle. It was loud, echoing through the courtroom like a slap. He didn't even try to hide it. He leaned back in his chair, hand over his mouth, shoulders shaking with genuine amusement. Adrian smirked, tapping his gold pen against the table, eyes glittering with predatory satisfaction. Judge Ellison removed his glasses slowly, pinching the bridge of his nose. He'd seen this before. Desperate, unrepresented spouses walking into legal slaughters. It never ended well. "Mrs. Hart," he began, his tone measured but firm. "I'm going to ask you this once, and I want you to listen very carefully. Your husband is the CEO of Hart Technologies. The marital assets in question are estimated in the tens of millions. Mr. Wolfe here has been practicing law for over 30 years. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "Are you absolutely certain you wish to proceed? You are bringing a knife to a nuclear war, madam." "I understand, Your Honor," Olivia said, her voice still soft, but steadier now. "I can't afford an attorney. Mr. Hart cut off my access to all joint accounts 6 months ago." Adrian shot to his feet. "Objection, Your Honor. Mr. Hart merely secured the assets to prevent frivolous spending. We've offered Mrs. Hart a generous settlement of $75,000 to facilitate a clean transition. She refused it out of spite. 75,000? The judge raised an eyebrow. More than fair for someone who brought nothing into the marriage, Adrian said smoothly, his voice dripping with condescension. She was a retail associate when they met, Your Honor. She has no business acumen, no financial literacy. We're trying to protect the company and its shareholders. Judge Ellison looked at Olivia, his expression softening slightly. Mrs. Hart, I strongly advise you to reconsider the settlement. If you proceed, you will be held to the same standards as a practicing attorney. I will not hold your hand. If you fail to object, evidence gets in. If you fail to file the right motions, you lose. He leaned forward, his voice dropping. Do you understand? Olivia looked up. For just a moment, something flickered in her eyes. Something cold, something sharp. But it vanished so quickly that Damien missed it entirely. I understand, Your Honor, she said. I'm ready. Damien leaned over to Adrian, his voice loud enough for half the room to hear. Watch this. She's going to cry before lunch. Adrian chuckled. I'll make it 15 minutes. Judge Ellison shot them both a warning glare before turning back to the courtroom. Mr. Wolfe, your opening statement. Adrian Wolfe stood and walked to the center of the room. He didn't need notes. He was a performer, and this was his stage. Your Honor, he began, his voice smooth and commanding. This case is tragic, but it is also simple. Damien Hart is a visionary. He built Hart Technologies from a garage startup into a global tech empire. He worked 80-hour weeks. He sacrificed holidays, weekends, time with family, all to build something that employs thousands and generates billions. He gestured toward Olivia with theatrical sympathy. And what did his wife do? She stayed home. She attended luncheons. She spent his money. And now that the marriage has unfortunately broken down due to irreconcilable differences, she wants half. She wants to dismantle a company that supports thousands of families just to fund a lifestyle she did nothing to earn. Adrian paused for effect, letting his words hang in the air. We will prove that Mrs. Hart's contributions to the marriage were negligible. We ask the court to limit spousal support to the statutory minimum and grant Mr. Hart full retention of all company shares and assets. He sat down with the confidence of a man who had already won. Judge Ellison looked at Olivia. Mrs. Hart, your opening statement. Keep it brief. Olivia stood slowly. She didn't walk to the podium. She stayed behind her table, holding the manila folder against her chest like a shield. My husband is right about one thing, she began, her voice quiet but clear. I was just a retail associate when we met. I worked at a department store, folding clothes for minimum wage. Damien rolled his eyes. Here comes the sob story, he thought. But Olivia's voice didn't break. It steadied. The law in this state recognizes marriage as a partnership. It recognizes good faith. Damien is asking you to believe that he built Hart Technologies alone. He's asking you to believe that the offshore accounts don't exist, that the shell companies aren't real, that the pension fund he drained is just an accounting error. The room went dead silent. Adrian's head snapped up. Damien froze mid-grin. The what pension fund? Judge Ellison asked, leaning forward sharply. Olivia looked directly at her husband. For the first time since entering the courtroom, her hands stopped shaking. The employee pension fund he embezzled, Your Honor, along with the Cayman Island holdings registered under Daniel Mercer's name, and the falsified mental health records he used to try to have me declared incompetent. She paused, letting the words land like grenades. I'm not here to take half, Your Honor. She opened the manila folder and pulled out a single document. I'm here for the truth. Damien's face drained of color. His laughter died in his throat. Adrian Wolfe sat frozen, his gold pen hovering motionless above his notepad. Judge Ellison leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowed, studying the woman in the crimson dress who suddenly didn't look fragile at all. Mrs. Hart, he said slowly, Those are serious allegations. I know, Your Honor, Olivia replied, her voice calm, steady, unshakable. And I have the evidence to prove every single one. If you think she's bluffing, you haven't been paying attention. Hit that subscribe button. You're going to want to see how this ends. The courtroom held its breath. Damien Hart was no longer laughing. And Olivia Hart was just getting started. The 15-minute recess felt like 15 seconds. When court resumed, the energy had shifted. The gallery was fuller now. Word had spread through the courthouse halls that something unusual was happening in Department 9. Reporters sat in the back row, phones silenced but fingers ready. Adrian Wolfe stood for his direct examination, and if he was rattled by Olivia's opening statement, he didn't show it. He was too seasoned, too practiced. He called his first witness with the confidence of a man holding all the cards. The defense calls Mr. Daniel Mercer to the stand. Daniel Mercer was Hart Technologies' CFO, a nervous man in an expensive suit with thinning hair and wire-rimmed glasses that kept sliding down his nose. He took the oath with a hand that shook slightly, then settled into the witness box. Adrian approached him like a friend. Mr. Mercer, how long have you worked for Hart Technologies? 12 years, Daniel said, his voice thin but steady. And in that time, would you say Damien Hart has been a responsible steward of the company's finances? Absolutely. Damien is meticulous. Every decision is calculated, every investment vetted. Adrian nodded approvingly. And are you familiar with Mrs. Hart's allegations regarding hidden offshore accounts and embezzled pension funds? Daniel shifted in his seat. I've heard the claims. They're completely unfounded. Our books are audited annually by external firms. Everything is transparent and above board. So these allegations of Cayman Island accounts and shell companies. Pure fiction, Daniel interrupted, a little too quickly. Mrs. Hart likely saw legitimate corporate expenses and misunderstood them. She has no financial background. Adrian smiled. No further questions. Your Honor? Judge Ellison looked at Olivia. Your witness, Mrs. Hart. Olivia stood slowly. She didn't grab her folder immediately. She walked toward the witness stand with deliberate steps, her crimson dress catching the afternoon light streaming through the tall windows. Hello, Mr. Mercer, she said softly. Mrs. Hart. Daniel nodded, adjusting his glasses. We've met before, haven't we? At the company holiday party last December? Yes, I believe so. Olivia smiled faintly. You told me I made an excellent tiramisu. A few people in the gallery chuckled. Even Daniel relaxed slightly. Yes, you did. Mr. Mercer, do you use cloud-based accounting software at Hart Technologies? Daniel blinked at the unexpected question. We use several platforms. QuickBooks for General Ledger, SAP for Enterprise Resource Planning, and Shadow Ledger? The color drained from Daniel's face. Adrian stood up. Objection. Relevance. I'm establishing the witness's familiarity with the company's financial systems, Your Honor, Olivia said calmly. Overruled, Judge Ellison said, leaning forward. Answer the question, Mr. Mercer. Daniel swallowed hard. Shadow Ledger it's a dual-entry system used for internal tracking. Internal tracking, Olivia repeated. Or maintaining two sets of books? It has that capability, but we don't. Olivia walked back to her table and retrieved a document. Your Honor, I'd like to submit Exhibit B wire transfer records from Hart Technologies' primary operating account. She handed the paper to the bailiff, who passed copies to the judge and Adrian. Damien leaned forward, trying to see what she had. Olivia returned to Daniel. Mr. Mercer, can you explain this transfer on March 14, 2024? $4 million sent to an entity called Blue Ocean Holdings in Grand Cayman? Daniel's hands gripped the armrests of the witness chair. That was for consulting services. Consulting for what? Market expansion, international strategy. And who authorized this payment? Daniel's eyes darted to Damien, then back to Olivia. Mr. Hart did. Did the board approve it? It was an operational expense under his discretionary authority. Olivia pulled out another document. This is the Articles of Incorporation for Blue Ocean Holdings, filed in the Cayman Islands on February 2, 2024. She placed it on the overhead projector. The name listed as principal owner appeared on the screen in bold type, Damien Hart. The gallery erupted in whispers. A reporter's camera shutter clicked. So Damien authorized a $4 million payment from the company, Olivia said, her voice cutting through the noise, to a shell company that he secretly owns. Does that sound like legitimate consulting to you, Mr. Mercer? I just processed the transfer. I didn't ask questions. Didn't ask? Or weren't allowed to? Adrian shot to his feet. Objection. Badgering the witness. Sustained, Judge Ellison said. Mrs. Hart, rephrase. Olivia nodded. Mr. Mercer, on December 8, 2023, did you attend a meeting with Damien Hart regarding the employee pension fund? Daniel went pale. I don't recall. Let me refresh your memory. Olivia pulled out yet another document. I have the calendar invite, subject line, Q4 pension adjustment. Does that ring a bell? Daniel said nothing. What was decided in that meeting, Mr. Mercer? I take the fifth. The courtroom exploded. Judge Ellison slammed his gavel. Order! Order! Olivia didn't flinch. She looked at the judge. Your Honor, Mr. Mercer just invoked his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination in a civil proceeding about corporate finance. The only reason to do that is if he believes answering might expose him to criminal liability. Judge Ellison removed his glasses, his expression grave. Mr. Mercer, I suggest you obtain counsel immediately. This court is going to be forwarding this transcript to the appropriate authorities. Daniel Mercer looked like he might be sick. Olivia returned to her table and pulled out a USB drive. Your Honor, if I may, this is Exhibit C, transaction logs recovered from the Hart family iCloud account. Damien synced his iPad to our home network, and every spreadsheet, every memo, every incriminating document he thought was private, backed up automatically. She held up the small device like a grenade. 2 years' worth of evidence, offshore transfers, pension diversions, every lie, time-stamped and categorized. Damien Hart stood up, his chair scraping violently. That's illegal. She hacked my files. I didn't hack anything, Olivia said, her voice steady as steel. I used the password you gave me when you set up the family account, the account you insisted we share. Judge Ellison pointed at Damien. Mr. Hart, sit down, or I will hold you in contempt. Damien sat, but his hands were shaking now. The confident smirk was gone, replaced by something closer to panic. Adrian Wolfe looked at his client with barely concealed fury. Olivia placed the USB drive on her table and looked at the judge. I have 300 pages of transaction records, Your Honor. Shell companies, falsified reports, diverted funds, all of it. The courtroom was silent, except for the hum of the air conditioning and the frantic scribbling of the court reporter. Judge Ellison stared at Olivia Hart, the woman in the 5-year-old dress who'd walked in looking fragile and afraid. She didn't look fragile anymore. We'll take a 30-minute recess, the judge said. And when we return, Mrs. Hart, you're going to walk me through every single page. Don't you dare scroll past this. If you're not subscribed yet, what are you even doing? This woman just pulled a tech billionaire's entire empire out from under him with a USB drive and a shared iCloud account. As the bailiff called the recess, Olivia sat down, her hands finally still. Damien Hart wasn't laughing anymore. He was staring at his wife like he'd never seen her before. Because he hadn't. The 30-minute recess felt like 30 hours. When court reconvened, Adrian Wolfe looked different. The polished veneer had cracked, replaced by something sharper, more desperate. He stood with the rigid posture of a man who knew he was losing but refused to surrender. "Your Honor," Adrian said, his voice clipped and cold. "Before we proceed with Mrs. Hart's exhibits, the defense would like to address a critical issue, the petitioner's mental stability." Olivia's stomach dropped. Adrian continued, pacing slowly. "Mrs. Hart has presented documents and made serious allegations, but the court must consider the source. In 2020, Mrs. Hart was hospitalized for severe psychological distress. She was diagnosed with paranoid delusions by a licensed psychiatrist." He pulled a document from his briefcase. "We have an affidavit from Dr. Leonard Franklin stating that Mrs. Hart has a history of fabricating conspiracies, of seeing threats where none exist. Your Honor, we're not dealing with evidence here. We're dealing with the obsessive fantasies of a mentally unstable woman." The gallery murmured. Olivia felt the stares burning into her back. Damien leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, a smirk playing at the corner of his mouth. This was it. The kill shot. The narrative he'd spent years building. Crazy Olivia. Poor, sad, crazy Olivia. Judge Ellison looked at Olivia. "Mrs. Hart, do you wish to respond to these allegations?" Olivia stood slowly. Her hands were shaking now, trembling against the table. But when she spoke, her voice was steady. "I do, Your Honor." She walked to her table and picked up a small digital voice recorder, the kind you could buy at any electronics store for $20. "The state of New York," Olivia said, her voice clear and strong, "is a one-party consent state for audio recordings. That means I don't need anyone's permission to record a conversation I'm part of." Adrian's face went rigid. "Your Honor, this is—" "For the last 2 years of my marriage," Olivia continued, cutting him off, "I carried this recorder with me. Every threat, every manipulation, every time my husband told me I was crazy, that no one would believe me, I recorded it." She held up the device. "This is Exhibit D." The courtroom went silent. Damien's smirk vanished. He sat forward, eyes locked on the recorder like it was a loaded gun. "Objection!" Adrian shouted. "This is a violation of marital privacy." "Overruled," Judge Ellison said sharply. "New York law is clear. If Mrs. Hart was party to these conversations, the recordings are admissible. Play it." Olivia's hands shook as she connected the recorder to the courtroom's audio system. She pressed play. Static crackled through the speakers, then a voice filled the room, unmistakably Damien Hart's. "Stop crying, Olivia. You're being pathetic." Olivia closed her eyes, hearing it again, living it again. "You really think anyone's going to believe you? You're a nobody who got lucky. I made you. I know what you're doing with the Cayman accounts, Damien. I saw the files. You saw papers you don't even understand, but let's say you do. Let's say you tell someone. Who are they going to believe? A Fortune 500 CEO or the hysterical housewife who spent a month in a psych ward?" A woman in the gallery gasped. Reporters were typing furiously. "You put me there." "I didn't put you anywhere. You broke down on your own. I just helped the narrative along. You paid Dr. Franklin." There was a long pause in the recording. Then Damien's voice, colder now. $50,000 is nothing for a psychiatrist with gambling debts. He'll diagnose whatever I tell him to diagnose. Paranoia, delusions, bipolar disorder. Take your pick. The courtroom erupted. Voices overlapped. Shock, outrage, disbelief. Judge Ellison slammed his gavel. "Order! Order in this court!" But the recording wasn't finished. "If you ever try to leave me, Olivia, if you ever try to take what's mine, I won't just divorce you. I'll have you committed, permanently. You'll spend the rest of your life drooling in a padded room while I enjoy my money with someone who actually appreciates it." "Damien, now get out of my sight." The recording ended with the sound of a door slamming. The silence that followed was deafening. Olivia stood at her table, tears streaming down her face. But her voice didn't waver. "He didn't just gaslight me, Your Honor. He weaponized the medical system against me. He paid a doctor to destroy my credibility so that if I ever found the truth, no one would believe me." Adrian Wolfe was frozen, his mouth open, but no words coming out. Damian Hart shot to his feet, his face purple with rage. "That's taken out of context. She edited it. Mr. Hart!" Judge Ellison roared. "Sit down now!" Damian remained standing, shaking. "This is entrapment. She set me up." "You set yourself up," Olivia said quietly, looking directly at him. "Every word on that recording is yours." Judge Ellison pointed at Damian. "Mr. Hart, if you do not sit down and remain silent, I will have the bailiff remove you, and you will watch the rest of this trial from a holding cell. Do you understand me?" Damian slowly sank into his chair, his hands gripping the armrests so hard his knuckles turned white. The judge turned to Adrian. "Mr. Wolfe, do you have any response to this?" Adrian looked at his client, then at the judge. I was not aware of this recording, Your Honor." "That much is obvious." Judge Ellison's voice was ice. "Mrs. Hart, the recording is admitted into evidence. And Mr. Wolfe, if you plan to continue questioning your client's wife's mental health, I suggest you think very carefully about your next move." Adrian said nothing. He simply sat down, his legal pad blank, his pen still. Olivia returned to her seat, wiping her eyes. Her hands were still shaking, but she felt lighter, like a weight she'd been carrying for years had finally been lifted. Still think this is just a divorce case? Subscribe now or you'll miss the moment this entire empire collapses. And trust me, you don't want to miss that. The gallery wasn't whispering anymore. They were staring at her, but the looks had changed. They weren't looking at her with pity. They were looking at her with something closer to awe and fear. Because the woman who had walked into this courtroom trembling and alone had just proven she was the most dangerous person in the room. She had been quiet, but she had been listening and recording everything. The recess lasted only 10 minutes, but in that time, everything changed. Outside the courthouse, news vans were assembling like vultures. The recording had leaked. Someone in the gallery had tipped off the press. By the time Judge Ellison returned to the bench, camera crews lined the courthouse steps, and the hashtag Hart Technologies was trending. Inside Department 9, the air felt electric, dangerous. "Mrs. Hart," Judge Ellison said, settling into his seat, "you have the floor, and I suggest you make every word count." Olivia stood, and this time she didn't hesitate. She walked to the projector and placed a document on the glass, a complex spreadsheet filled with rows of numbers and dates. "Your Honor, this is a comparison of employee pension contributions at Hart Technologies versus the actual deposits made into the custodial account at First National Bank." The spreadsheet appeared on the screen, columns highlighted in red and green. "From January 2022 to present," Olivia continued, her voice steady. "Every employee had 5% of their paycheck automatically deducted for retirement. That's standard, but the money never reached the pension fund." She placed another document on the projector, a bank statement with the Hart Technologies logo. "This is the ledger for Blue Ocean Holdings in Grand Cayman, the same shell company Mr. Mercer testified about earlier." She used a laser pointer to circle specific dates. January 15th, 2022, $400,000 deducted from employee payroll. January 17th, 2022, $380,000 deposited into Blue Ocean. The pattern repeated down the page, month after month, year after year. "He was skimming the retirement fund," Olivia said, her voice rising, "laundering it through the Caymans to avoid taxes, then using it to buy real estate, luxury cars, and fund his offshore accounts. 4,000 employees, 2 years, over $18 million stolen." The gallery exploded. Reporters were on their phones. Someone shouted from the back. Judge Ellison slammed his gavel. Order! One more outburst and I'm clearing this courtroom. Adrian Wolfe sat motionless, staring at his legal pad. He looked like a man watching his entire career implode in real time. Damien Hart was sweating now, his expensive suit jacket darkened at the armpits. His hands gripped the edge of the table, his breathing shallow and rapid. "Mr. Mercer," Judge Ellison said, his voice cutting through the chaos. "You're still under oath. Do you wish to respond to these allegations?" Daniel Mercer sat in the witness box, his face ashen. He looked at Damien, then at Olivia, then at the floor. His voice cracked. "I can't take the fifth again, can I?" "You can," the judge said. "But I will draw an adverse inference, and the district attorney is watching this testimony very closely." Daniel closed his eyes. When he opened them, tears were streaming down his face. "It's true," he whispered. The courtroom went dead silent. "Louder, Mr. Mercer." "It's true!" Daniel shouted, his voice breaking. "Damien told me to do it. He said the pension fund was just sitting there, that we could borrow against it temporarily for expansion. But we never paid it back. We just kept taking." He buried his face in his hands. "I knew it was wrong. I knew. But he said if I didn't do it, he'd fire me. I have a mortgage. I have kids. I was scared." "And where is that money now?" Judge Ellison asked. "Offshore. Real estate. Some of it's gone. Spent. The employees have nothing, Your Honor. The fund is empty." The weight of those words settled over the courtroom like a shroud. Olivia returned to her table, her face carefully neutral, but her hands were shaking again. Not from fear this time, but from adrenaline. Judge Ellison removed his glasses and cleaned them slowly, deliberately. When he put them back on, his expression was granite. "Mr. Hart," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Do you have anything to say?" Damien stood, his lawyer frantically tugging at his sleeve to sit back down, but Damien shook him off. "I invoke my Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination," Damien said, his voice tight. "You can't be serious," the judge said. "I'm invoking the Fifth," Damien repeated. Judge Ellison leaned forward. "Mr. Hart, you understand what you're doing? By invoking your Fifth Amendment rights in a civil proceeding, you're essentially admitting that answering these questions could expose you to criminal prosecution. I understand. And you also understand that in doing so, I am legally permitted to draw an adverse inference, meaning I can assume the worst about every allegation Mrs. Peta Hart has made." Damien's jaw clenched. "I understand." Adrian Wolfe stood up, his voice strained. "Your Honor, I need a moment to confer with my client." "Sit down, Mr. Wolfe," Damien snapped. "I'm invoking the Fifth." Judge Ellison sat back, his expression cold. "So noted." Olivia stood. "Your Honor, I'd like to request an emergency order freezing all marital assets and granting me majority control under the doctrine of asset dissipation." Adrian shot to his feet. "Absolutely not. That's—" "Mr. Wolfe," the judge interrupted. "Your client just invoked his Fifth Amendment rights regarding embezzlement of $18 million. He has demonstrated a clear pattern of hiding, stealing, and dissipating assets. On what grounds would I not freeze his accounts?" Adrian had no answer. Judge Ellison looked at Olivia. "Mrs. Hart? Asset dissipation is a serious claim. You're asking me to hand you control of a multi-million-dollar company and freeze your husband's personal assets. What assurance do I have that you won't do the same?" Olivia met his gaze. "Because I'm not asking for this for myself, Your Honor. I'm asking for it so I can repay the employees he stole from. They have families, retirements, dreams. He took that from them. I want to give it back." The gallery murmured in approval. Judge Ellison studied her for a long moment. "I'm inclined to grant your motion, Mrs. Hart. But before I do, Mr. Hart, do you have any response?" Damien said nothing. He just stared at Olivia with pure, unadulterated hatred. Very well, the judge said. I am issuing an emergency order freezing all assets held by— Your Honor, Olivia interrupted softly. There's one more thing. She reached into her folder and pulled out a printed email confirmation. This is a flight itinerary. First-class ticket to Sao Paulo, Brazil, departing tonight at 11:45 p.m., non-extraditable country. One-way ticket. Purchased this morning during the lunch recess. She handed it to the bailiff. Damien Hart is a flight risk. The courtroom erupted again. Damien's face went from red to white in an instant. How did you— He turned to his lawyer. She hacked my email. I didn't hack anything, Olivia said calmly. It came to our shared family iCloud account, the same one you've been using for 2 years. Judge Ellison's expression darkened. Mr. Hart, is this true? Did you book a flight to Brazil? Damien's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Bailiff, the judge ordered, his voice like steel. Confiscate Mr. Hart's passport immediately. The bailiff approached the defense table. Damien clutched his briefcase. It's at home. Search him, the judge ordered. You can't. 2 bailiffs moved in. Within seconds, they'd pulled the navy blue passport from Damien's inner jacket pocket. The look on Damien Hart's face was pure terror. Judge Ellison held up the passport. Mr. Hart, you are hereby ordered to surrender all travel documents. You are not to leave the state of New York pending further hearings. Assets are frozen effective immediately. Mrs. Hart is granted emergency conservatorship of all marital property, including voting shares of Hart Technologies. He slammed the gavel. We're adjourned. And Mr. Hart, I suggest you get a better lawyer. If you're still not subscribed after watching this man's entire criminal empire get exposed with a $20 voice recorder and a family iCloud account, I genuinely don't know what will convince you. Hit that button. As the courtroom emptied, Olivia remained seated, staring at the table. She'd done it. She'd cracked the empire wide open. But the war wasn't over yet. The heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom exploded open with a bang that made everyone jump. 6 men and women in Navy windbreakers stormed in, moving with military precision. The yellow letters on their backs were unmistakable. SEC and DOJ. Behind them came 2 uniformed NYPD officers, hands resting on their belts. The lead agent, a tall woman with sharp eyes and an expression carved from stone, strode down the center aisle. She pointed directly at the defense table. Damien Hart, she announced, her voice cutting through the stunned silence. I'm Special Agent Naomi Brooks with the Securities and Exchange Commission. You're under arrest for securities fraud, embezzlement, wire fraud, and money laundering. The courtroom erupted into chaos. Damien shot to his feet, his chair clattering backward. What? No, you can't. This is a civil hearing. Not anymore, Agent Brooks said coldly. 2 officers moved in, flanking him. Get your hands off me, Damien shouted, jerking away. Adrian, do something! Adrian Wolfe stood frozen, his face the color of old newspaper. He looked at the agents, then at his client, then at the judge. His mouth opened, but no words came out. Damien Hart, one of the officers said, pulling out handcuffs. You have the right to remain silent. This is insane, Damien screamed, his voice cracking. I'm a CEO! You can't arrest me in open court like some common criminal. You embezzled $18 million from your employees' retirement fund, Agent Brooks said flatly. That makes you exactly a common criminal. The officer grabbed Damien's wrist. The metallic click of the handcuffs echoed through the courtroom. Damien twisted around, eyes wild. Olivia, tell them this is a mistake. Olivia sat perfectly still at her table. She didn't move, didn't speak. Her eyes were glassy, unfocused, trauma and triumph swirling together in a way that left her numb. Mrs. Hart had nothing to do with this, Agent Brooks said. In fact, She's the one who contacted us 3 days ago and provided the evidence that launched this investigation. Damien's face went slack with shock. You called them? Olivia finally looked at him. Her voice was quiet, steady. I called them the day after I found the red notebook. Damien lunged forward, but the officers held him back. You destroyed me! You destroyed everything! No, Olivia said, her voice cutting through his rage. You destroyed yourself. I just made sure everyone saw it. Get him out of here, Agent Brooks ordered. The officers dragged Damien toward the aisle. He thrashed, shouting incoherently. Reporters were on their feet, cameras flashing, phones recording. The bailiff was yelling for order, but no one was listening. Your Honor! Adrian Wolf's voice finally broke through the chaos. He looked pale, shaken. I move to withdraw as counsel for Mr. Hart, effective immediately. Judge Ellison, who had been watching the scene with grim satisfaction, turned his attention to the lawyer. On what grounds, Mr. Wolf? On the grounds that my client has lied to me repeatedly, exposed me to potential criminal liability, and made it impossible for me to represent him ethically. You coward! Damien screamed from the aisle. You're abandoning me? Adrian didn't even look at him. Your Honor, I had no knowledge of the embezzlement, the bribes, or the offshore accounts. I was operating on false information provided by my client. Judge Ellison's expression was ice. Mr. Wolf, you will remain available for questioning by the court and federal authorities. If I find out you knew more than you're claiming, I will personally see to it that you're disbarred. Am I clear? Crystal, Your Honor. The officers reached the doors, half dragging Damien between them. Olivia! Damien's voice was raw, desperate. Olivia, please, I'll give you everything. The company, the house, all of it. Just call them off. Olivia turned away, facing forward. Olivia? His scream echoed down the marble hallway as they pulled him through the doors. Olivia! The doors slammed shut. The courtroom fell into a stunned, breathless silence. Judge Ellison waited a full 10 seconds before speaking. Is there anyone else in this courtroom who would like to confess to a felony before we continue? No one spoke. He turned to Olivia. Mrs. Hart, in light of Mr. Hart's arrest and the federal seizure of his assets, Hart Technologies is effectively without leadership. The board of directors is under investigation. The company is in free fall. Olivia stood slowly. I understand, Your Honor. I am granting you emergency conservatorship of all voting shares held within the marital estate. That makes you the majority shareholder and, for all practical purposes, the acting CEO of Hart Technologies. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Your Honor, Olivia said, her voice trembling slightly. I've never run a company before. Neither had your husband when he started, Judge Ellison said. But unlike him, you seem to possess a conscience. The employees deserve someone who won't steal from them. The court trusts you'll do better than the man who just got dragged out in handcuffs. He banged the gavel once. This hearing is adjourned pending criminal proceedings. Mrs. Hart, I'll see you back here in 30 days for the final dissolution hearing, assuming your husband isn't in federal prison by then. He will be, Agent Brooks said from the back of the room. Olivia gathered her papers with shaking hands. Around her, reporters were shouting questions, but she couldn't hear them. Everything sounded muffled, distant. She walked down the aisle in a daze. The gallery parted for her like the Red Sea. As she reached the doors, she heard it, faint, echoing from somewhere down the hall. Olivia! Damien's voice, broken and desperate, calling her name one last time. She pushed through the doors and stepped into the blinding sunlight. Behind her, the courtroom buzzed with 100 conversations, but Olivia Hart walked forward, alone. And for the first time in years, she felt free. The black town car pulled up to the gleaming glass tower at exactly 8 o'clock a.m. Hart Technologies headquarters rose 42 stories above Midtown Manhattan, its steel and glass facade reflecting the morning sun like a monument to corporate power. Olivia stared up at it from the sidewalk, feeling impossibly small. She was still wearing the crimson dress, the same one she'd worn to court 3 days ago. It was wrinkled now, the fabric soft from repeated wear. She hadn't been home. She'd been sleeping in a hotel room, living out of a carry-on suitcase, too afraid to return to the penthouse she'd shared with Damien. But today, she had no choice. Today, she had to walk into the empire her husband built, and claim it as her own. The lobby was a cathedral of marble and chrome. Employees moved through it like ghosts, their voices hushed, their eyes darting nervously. Everyone knew what had happened. The arrest had been televised. The news was everywhere. As Olivia walked toward the elevators, conversations stopped mid-sentence. People stared, some with fear, some with curiosity, a few with something that looked like hope. A young woman in a pantsuit approached hesitantly. "Mrs. Hart?" Olivia stopped. "Yes?" "I'm Sarah Roberts. I work in accounting." She paused, her voice dropping. "Thank you. For what you did. My retirement fund. I thought it was gone forever." Olivia felt her throat tighten. "I'm going to fix it. I promise." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. She nodded and walked away. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor felt like an eternity. When the doors opened, Olivia stepped into the executive suite, a sprawling space of glass walls, leather furniture, and panoramic views of the city. The receptionist's desk was empty. The hallways were silent. At the end of the corridor, double doors stood open. The boardroom. Olivia took a breath and walked inside. 12 people sat around the massive oval table. They all turned to look at her. The expressions ranged from shock to contempt to barely concealed fury. At the head of the table sat Richard Langford, 70 years old, silver-haired, with the kind of face that looked perpetually skeptical. He was the chairman of the board, a corporate raider who'd made his fortune gutting companies and selling them for parts. "Mrs. Hart," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "What a surprise." Olivia walked to the opposite end of the table. She didn't sit. "Good morning." "This is a closed board meeting," said Harold Briggs, a heavy-set man with jowls and a Rolex that could fund a small school. "You have no authority to be here." "Actually," Olivia said calmly, "I have a court order granting me emergency conservatorship of all voting shares in the marital estate. That's 51%, which makes me the majority shareholder." She pulled the document from her bag and slid it down the polished table. Richard Langford picked it up, scanned it, and tossed it aside. "This is temporary. You're a housewife, Mrs. Hart. You have no experience running a company. The stock has already dropped 40% since your husband's arrest. If you don't step aside, we'll have nothing left to salvage." "Which is exactly what you want," Olivia said. The room went quiet. "Excuse me?" Langford's eyes narrowed. Olivia opened her bag and pulled out 3 manila folders. She walked around the table, placing one in front of Langford, one in front of Briggs, and one in front of Denise Collier, a sharp-faced woman in a designer suit who'd been silent until now. "What is this?" Denise asked, opening the folder. "That," Olivia said, "is a record of the kickbacks you received from the Nevada warehouse construction. You approved a bid 20% higher than market rate. The construction company is owned by your brother-in-law." Denise's face went pale. Olivia turned to Richard Langford. "And you, Mr. Langford. You've been short-selling Hart Technologies stock for 3 months. You knew Damien was cooking the books. You were betting against the company you were supposed to protect." Langford slammed his hand on the table. "This is slander." "It's in the emails," Olivia said. "Damien kept everything. He didn't trust any of you." She turned to Harold Briggs. "And you, Mr. Briggs, took a $2 million consulting fee from a supplier that turned out to be another shell company. You approved contracts that inflated costs and pocketed the difference." Harold's mouth opened and closed like a fish. Olivia placed her hands on the back of the leather chair at the head of the table, Damien's chair. "Here's how this is going to work," she said, her voice steady and cold. "Langford, Briggs, Collier, you're resigning. Effective immediately. You'll cite personal health reasons. If you do, I won't hand these files to the federal agents who are currently downstairs seizing the servers." She leaned forward. "If you fight me, you'll share a cell with Damien." Richard Langford stood, his face red. "You don't have the authority." "I have 51% of the voting shares," Olivia interrupted. "I have the court's backing, and I have the evidence to bury you, so sit down or get out." The silence was suffocating. Langford grabbed his briefcase. "You're making a mistake." "No," Olivia said. "Damien made the mistake. You just enabled it." Langford stormed out. Briggs and Collier followed, heads down, defeated. Olivia looked at the remaining 9 board members. They sat frozen, terrified. "Now," she said, finally sitting in the oversized leather chair. It felt too big, too heavy, but she filled the space anyway. "Let's talk about how we're going to rebuild this company, starting with paying back every stolen dollar to the pension fund." One of the board members, a younger man named Marcus, raised his hand tentatively. "Mrs. Hart, do you really think you can do this?" Olivia looked at him. "I took down a billionaire with a voice recorder and a cheap laptop. I think I can handle a boardroom." A few people smiled. The tension eased, just slightly. Over the next hour, Olivia restructured the board. She appointed 2 warehouse supervisors, a senior software engineer, and a veteran HR director to fill the empty seats. She promoted ethical executives who'd been overlooked. She dismantled the toxic hierarchy Damien had built. By the time the meeting ended, the board looked nothing like it had that morning. Olivia sat alone in the boardroom after everyone left. The city stretched out below her, vast and indifferent. She stared at the chair she was sitting in, Damien's chair, the throne he'd built his empire on. And for the first time, a question she'd been avoiding surfaced in her mind. Why me? Why had Damien chosen her, of all people? A retail associate with no connections, no money, no power? It didn't make sense. Unless... Olivia stood abruptly, her heart racing. Unless she hadn't been chosen at all. Unless she'd been targeted. She grabbed her phone and dialed Agent Naomi Brooks. "Agent Brooks," the voice answered. "It's Olivia Hart. I need you to run a background check on my father." A pause. "Your father?" "Anthony Morano. He died 7 years ago. Hit and run. I need to know if there's any connection to Damien or Hart Technologies." "Mrs. Hart, why would—" "Please," Olivia said, her voice cracking. "Just check." Another pause. "I'll call you back in an hour." Olivia hung up and stared out at the city. Something dark was stirring in the back of her mind. A memory. A conversation. Damien laughing at a dinner party. "I always get what I want, one way or another." She closed her eyes. What did you do, Damien? And more importantly, what am I about to find out? Comment below, right now. Do you think Olivia's father's death was really an accident? Because if you're thinking what I'm thinking, what happened next is going to destroy you. It was 11:47 p.m. when Olivia finally returned to the executive suite. The building was empty. The cleaning crews had finished hours ago, leaving behind the faint smell of lemon polish and the heavy silence of 42 floors of steel and glass. Olivia's heels echoed against the marble as she walked down the darkened hallway toward Damien's office. His office. Not hers. Not yet. She pushed open the heavy door and flicked on the lights. The space was exactly as he'd left it. Mahogany desk, leather chairs, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the glittering cityscape. On the wall hung a large oil painting of a 19th-century schooner cutting through stormy seas. Olivia stared at the painting. She'd seen it 100 times during the rare occasions Damien had allowed her to visit his office. He used to brag about it, some meaningless story about maritime conquest and legacy. But now, standing in the silence, she remembered something else. "I keep my real insurance behind that ship," Damien had said once, drunk at a holiday party, laughing with his CFO. "The stuff even my lawyer doesn't know about." Olivia's heart began to race. She walked to the painting and lifted it off the wall. It was heavier than she expected, the frame solid and expensive. Behind it was a wall safe, brushed steel with a digital keypad. She stared at it for a moment, then punched in 6 numbers: 08 15 78. Damien's birth date. The man's ego was so massive, he couldn't imagine using anything else. The lock clicked. The door swung open. Inside were 3 external hard drives, a stack of USB drives, and a single weathered notebook bound in red leather. Olivia pulled out the notebook. Her hands were shaking. The cover was unmarked, except for a single word embossed in faded gold: Marano. Her breath caught. Marano. Her father's last name. Her maiden name. She carried the notebook to Damien's desk and sat down, her fingers trembling as she opened the cover. The first entry was dated June 12, 2014. Target identified: Olivia Marano, daughter of Anthony Marano. Anthony owns the deed to 14 acres of industrial waterfront in Secaucus. Union foreman. Stubborn. Won't sell. Claims the land is sacred to his family, whatever that means. We need that land for the warehouse expansion. Adrian says we need a workaround. Olivia's stomach turned. She flipped the page. June 30th, 2014. Adrian suggests the widower route. If Anthony dies intestate, the land goes to the daughter. If I marry the daughter, the land becomes a marital asset. We bypass the union contracts entirely. Cleaner than a hostile takeover, less paperwork. I've seen photos. She's pretty enough. Works at some department store in Jersey. This could work. Olivia's vision blurred. The words on the page swam together. No, 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 no. She turned the page with shaking hands. August 15th, 2014. Problem solved. The old man wouldn't get out of the road. Adrian was driving. It was messier than we planned, but effective. Police report filed as hit and run. No witnesses. Case will go cold within a month. The girl's devastated. Perfect. I'll give her a few weeks to grieve, then I'll accidentally meet her at that diner she works at. She'll be vulnerable, grateful for the attention. We own the land now. We own her. The notebook slipped from Olivia's hands and hit the desk with a dull thud. Her father. Her father hadn't died in a random accident. He'd been murdered. Run down in the street like an animal because he wouldn't sell a piece of land. And Damien had orchestrated the whole thing. The meet cute at the diner, the flowers, the romance, the proposal. None of it was real. She hadn't been chosen. She'd been acquired. Her father's voice echoed in her memory, warm and rough like gravel. "Livy, you stay away from those corporate types. You hear me? They don't see people. They see assets. You're worth more than that." She'd laughed, kissed his cheek. "Papa, you worry too much. I can take care of myself." "I know you can, sweetheart. I know you can." Olivia's body shook with silent sobs. She pressed her hands against the desk, trying to steady herself, but the grief came in waves, sharp, relentless, suffocating. Her father had been right. He'd tried to warn her, and they'd killed him for it. For land. For a warehouse. She buried her face in her hands and wept. Deep, racking sobs that tore through her chest. She cried for her father. For the years she'd spent believing his death was just bad luck. Just a tragic accident. For the life she'd built on a foundation of lies. But then, slowly, the grief began to harden. It crystallized into something colder, sharper. Rage. Olivia lifted her head. Her eyes were red, but they were clear. Damien hadn't just stolen from his employees. He hadn't just gaslighted her. He'd murdered her father and then married her to cover it up. And Adrian Wolfe, the lawyer who'd tried to destroy her in court, had been the one driving the car. She stood up, grabbing the notebook and shoving it into her bag. She pulled out her phone and dialed Agent Brooks. It rang once, twice. "Mrs. Hart?" Brooks answered, her voice alert despite the late hour. "I was just about to call you. I found something on your father's case." "I know," Olivia said, her voice flat. "I found it too. Damien and Adrian Wolfe killed him. It's all in a notebook. I'm bringing it to you." A pause. "Mrs. Hart, where are you right now?" "Hart Technologies. Damien's office." "Are you alone?" "Yes." "Stay there. Lock the door. I'm sending a team." A crackling sound interrupted her. The intercom on Olivia's desk buzzed to life. The old security system Damien had insisted on keeping. A voice, distorted and metallic, echoed through the empty office. "Mrs. Hart, this is building security. There's a visitor here to see you." Olivia froze. "Who?" she whispered into the intercom. A pause. Then, "Adrian Wolfe." Olivia's blood turned to ice. "Mrs. Hart?" Brooks' voice crackled through the phone. "Olivia, talk to me. What's happening?" The intercom clicked off. From somewhere far below, 42 floors down, Olivia heard the faint metallic ding of the elevator arriving. Then another ding, closer, and another. He was coming up. Olivia backed away from the desk, clutching the phone and the notebook. "Agent Brooks," she whispered, her voice shaking. "He's here. If you're not subscribed right now, you need to be, because what happens next will have you on the edge of your seat. Don't miss it." The elevator doors opened with a soft chime that sounded like a death knell. Olivia stood frozen in Damien's office, her phone pressed to her ear, Agent Brooks's voice urgent on the other end. "Olivia, listen to me. Do not engage with him. Lock the door and stay on the line. We're 10 minutes out." The office door swung open. Adrian Wolfe stepped inside. He looked nothing like the polished lawyer who'd stood in court just days ago. His suit jacket was gone. His shirt was untucked, wrinkled. His tie hung loose around his neck. His eyes were red-rimmed, wild, the eyes of a man who'd lost everything and had nothing left to lose. "Hello, Olivia," he said, his voice rough. Olivia's thumb hovered over the phone screen. Without looking down, she pressed the speaker button and slipped the phone into her pocket, still connected to Agent Brooks. "Adrian," she said, trying to keep her voice steady, "what are you doing here?" He closed the door behind him. The click of the lock echoed through the office. "I think you know," he said, walking slowly toward the desk. His eyes fell on the open safe, the scattered hard drives. "You found it, didn't you? The notebook." Olivia's hand tightened around the strap of her bag, the bag with the red notebook inside. "I don't know what you're talking about." Adrian laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "Don't play stupid, Olivia. You've been playing the fool this whole time, and look where it got you. You destroyed Damien. You took the company. And now you've found the one thing that can destroy me." He took another step closer. "Give me the notebook." "No." Adrian's expression hardened. "You don't understand what you're dealing with. That notebook doesn't just implicate me. It implicates people far more powerful than Damien ever was. If you hand that over to the FBI, you're not a hero, you're a target." "My father," Olivia said, her voice shaking with barely contained rage. "You killed my father." "It was an accident," Adrian said quickly. "It wasn't supposed to happen that way. He stepped into the road. You ran him down like a dog." "He wouldn't sell," Adrian shouted, his composure finally cracking. "He had 14 acres of prime industrial waterfront, and he wouldn't sell because of some sentimental garbage about his grandfather. Do you know how much money was on the line? How many jobs? How much expansion? So you murdered him, Olivia whispered. I solved a problem, Adrian said coldly. And then I made sure you were taken care of. Damien married you. You lived in luxury. You had everything. I had nothing, Olivia said, because none of it was real. Adrian lunged forward, reaching for her bag. Olivia jerked backward, holding the bag against her chest. Stay away from me! Give me the notebook, Olivia, or I swear to God, I will make you disappear just like your father. They'll find you at the bottom of the Hudson, and everyone will think you jumped because you couldn't handle the pressure. Olivia's hand slipped into her jacket pocket. Her fingers closed around the small canister of pepper spray she'd started carrying after the divorce began. You want the notebook? She said, her voice steadying. She pulled it out of her bag and held it up. Come and get it. She threw the notebook straight up into the air. Adrian's eyes followed it instinctively, his hands reaching upward. Olivia pulled the pepper spray and unleashed a stream directly into his face. Adrian screamed, a raw, animalistic sound. He stumbled backward, clawing at his eyes, crashing into the desk. Olivia didn't wait. She bolted for the door, ripping it open and sprinting into the hallway. Behind her, Adrian's roar echoed through the office. You're dead! You hear me, Olivia? You're dead! She ran toward the emergency stairwell, her heels pounding against the marble. She grabbed the handle and pulled. It didn't budge. No, 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 no. A red light blinked above the door. Lockdown mode active. The building's automated security system had engaged. Midnight protocol. All exits sealed until morning, unless manually overridden from the security office. She was trapped. Footsteps echoed down the hallway behind her. Heavy. Uneven. There's nowhere to go, Olivia. Adrian's voice called out, hoarse and venomous. The building's locked down. It's just you and me now. Olivia ran. She ducked into the accounting department, a maze of cubicles and glass-walled conference rooms bathed in the eerie glow of emergency lighting. She crouched low, moving between desks, her breath coming in short gasps. A crash echoed from somewhere behind her. Glass shattering. I can hear you breathing. Adrian's voice sang out, closer now. Olivia peered around a cubicle wall. Adrian was walking slowly through the rows, his face still red and swollen from the pepper spray. In his right hand, he held a jagged shard of broken glass from a shattered picture frame, long, sharp, lethal. She ducked back down, pressing her hand over her mouth to muffle her breathing. Her phone buzzed silently in her pocket. She pulled it out. The call with Agent Brooks was still connected. She typed a silent text. 42nd floor. Accounting dept. He has a weapon. Brooks's reply came instantly. SWAT en route. 4 minutes. Hide. 4 minutes. She could hide for 4 minutes. A shadow fell over her cubicle. Olivia looked up. Adrian stood above her, the glass shard raised. Found you. Olivia scrambled backward, kicking a desk chair into his path. It crashed into his legs, buying her seconds. She ran toward the floor-to-ceiling windows at the far end of the room. There's nowhere to go, Adrian shouted, chasing her. You think you can beat me? I've been cleaning up messes for 20 years. You're just another loose end. Olivia spun around, holding up her phone. You're right, Adrian, she said, her voice shaking but clear. I can't beat you. Adrian stopped, breathing hard, the glass shard dripping blood from where it had cut his own hand. But I don't have to, Olivia continued. She held up the phone so he could see the screen. Because Agent Naomi Brooks has been listening to every word you've said for the last 10 minutes. Adrian's face went white. Every confession, every threat, all of it recorded, admissible in court. A massive crash erupted from somewhere far below. The sound of shattering glass and shouting voices. Federal agents! A voice boomed through the building's PA system. Drop your weapon and get on the ground. Heavy footsteps thundered up the stairwell. Boots, tactical gear, flashlights cutting through the darkness. Adrian looked at the door, then at Olivia, then at the glass shard in his hand. "Don't," Olivia said quietly. For a moment, Adrian just stood there, swaying slightly. Then he dropped the shard. It clattered against the floor, breaking into smaller pieces. The door burst open. 6 SWAT officers poured in, rifles raised. "On the ground, now!" Adrian sank to his knees, hands behind his head. Agent Naomi Brooks entered last, her expression grim. She walked straight to Olivia. "Are you hurt?" Olivia shook her head, unable to speak. Brooks turned to the officers. "Adrian Wolf, you're under arrest for assault, attempted murder, and conspiracy to commit murder in the death of Anthony Marano." As they cuffed him, Adrian looked at Olivia one last time. "You don't know what you've done," he whispered. "This doesn't end here." "Yes," Olivia said, her voice steady now. "It does." They dragged him away. Olivia stood alone in the darkened office, surrounded by shattered glass and overturned furniture. She looked down at her phone. The recording was still running. She pressed stop. And finally, she let herself breathe. Still not subscribed? This woman just survived a murder attempt armed with nothing but pepper spray and a phone recording. If that doesn't convince you to hit that button, I don't know what will. 6 months later. The courtroom was packed for the sentencing. Olivia sat in the front row of the gallery, hands folded in her lap, watching as Judge Raymond Ellison reviewed the final documents. The same courtroom, the same judge. But everything else had changed. Olivia Hart stood before the bench in an orange jumpsuit, his hands cuffed in front of him. The man who'd once worn $1,000 suits now looked hollow, diminished. His hair had gone gray at the temples. His face was gaunt. "Olivia Hart," Judge Ellison said, his voice echoing through the silent room. "You have been found guilty of wire fraud, securities fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. The evidence presented by the prosecution, much of it provided by your ex-wife, was overwhelming." Damien didn't look at Olivia. He stared at the floor. "You stole from your employees. You manipulated the financial system. You destroyed lives for personal gain." The judge paused. "I hereby sentence you to 25 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole for 15 years. The gavel fell. Damien's shoulders slumped. As the bailiffs led him away, he glanced back, just once, at Olivia. She met his gaze. She didn't smile, didn't gloat. She just watched as the man who'd tried to bury her was led through the doors in chains. 2 weeks later, Adrian Wolf's trial concluded in a different courtroom across the city. The evidence was damning. The recording from that night in the tower. The notebook. Forensic reports matching paint samples from Adrian's car to the scene of Anthony Marano's death 7 years ago. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. "Guilty on all counts," the foreperson announced. "First-degree murder, conspiracy, attempted murder." Adrian Wolf was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. When Olivia heard the verdict, she closed her eyes and whispered a single word: "Papa." The transformation of Hart Technologies took months. Olivia restructured the entire company. The corrupt board members were gone, replaced by elected representatives from every department. She converted the corporation into an employee-owned cooperative. Every worker, from the warehouse staff to the senior engineers, now held shares. The pension fund was fully restored. Every stolen dollar repaid with interest. On a crisp October morning, Olivia stood in the boardroom, her boardroom now, overlooking the city. The glass walls reflected the sunrise, turning the sky into molten gold. Sarah Chen, the young accountant who'd thanked her that first day, stood beside her. "The quarterly report came in," Sarah said, handing Olivia a folder. "We're profitable again. Stock's up 18%. Employee satisfaction is at an all-time high." Olivia opened the folder, scanning the numbers. It was real. They'd done it. "Thank you, Sarah," she said quietly. Sarah smiled. "No, Mrs. Hart. Thank you." As Sarah left, Olivia remained at the window, staring out at the city she'd once felt so small in. She wasn't small anymore. She had walked into a courtroom alone, trembling, mocked, and she had walked out with an empire. But more than that, she'd walked out with the truth. That afternoon, Olivia drove to New Jersey. The cemetery was quiet, tucked away in a corner of Secaucus, where the industrial sprawl gave way to old trees and weathered headstones. She parked near the entrance and walked the familiar path to her father's grave. Anthony Marano, beloved father, 1952. 2017. Olivia knelt in the grass, placing a bouquet of white lilies against the stone. Then she pulled 2 items from her bag: the red notebook and the court order transferring the 14 acres of industrial land back into the Marano family trust. "I got it back, Papa," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I got your land back, and I made them pay." Tears streamed down her face, but she smiled through them. "You were right about them. About everything. You told me to stay away from corporate types. You said they don't see people. They see assets." She wiped her eyes. "But you also taught me something else. You taught me to fight. To never let anyone make me feel small." She placed her hand on the cold stone. "I didn't let them, Papa. I didn't let them win." The wind rustled through the trees, carrying with it the faint scent of autumn leaves and distant rain. Olivia stayed there for a long time, just sitting in the grass beside her father's grave, feeling the weight of the last year finally begin to lift. She'd lost so much. Her marriage, her innocence, her belief that love could be unconditional. But she'd gained something far more valuable: herself. That evening, Olivia returned to her apartment, a modest place in Brooklyn, nothing like the penthouse she'd shared with Damien. She'd sold everything from that old life, started fresh. She poured herself a glass of wine and sat by the window, watching the city lights flicker to life. Her phone buzzed. A text from Agent Brooks. "Saw the sentencing. Justice served. Proud of you." Olivia smiled and typed back, "Thank you. For everything." She set the phone down and stared out at the skyline. Somewhere out there, Damien was sitting in a cell, replaying every mistake he'd made. Adrian was locked away for life, his legacy reduced to a cautionary tale. And Olivia? Olivia was free. She thought back to that first day in court. The whispers, the laughter, the way Damien had leaned back in his chair, so certain she would crumble. "Look at her. She's wearing that dress I bought her 5 years ago. It's pathetic. She thinks she's in a movie." She looked down at the crimson dress hanging in her closet, the same one she'd worn that day. She'd kept it, not as a reminder of what she'd endured, but as a reminder of what she'd survived. Olivia raised her glass to the city, to her father, to herself. "He laughed when I stood alone in court," she said softly, her voice steady and sure. "But he wasn't laughing when I spoke." She took a sip of wine, letting the words settle over her like armor. The battle was over. The empire had fallen. And Olivia Hart, once a target, once a victim, once underestimated, had risen from the ashes, not as someone's wife, not as someone's prey, but as herself, whole, strong, unbreakable. And finally, after all the years of silence, her voice had been heard. They said she was delusional to walk into that courtroom. They said she would break. But the woman they underestimated became the woman they feared. And in the end, the only thing that broke was their empire. Before you go, drop a comment and tell me, what would you have done in Olivia's position? And if this story moved you, hit that subscribe button. Stories like this don't tell themselves, and I've got plenty more. See you in the next one.